DiBiase is spending the night with his family. The threat of possibly spending decades in prison no longer hanging over his head. Prosecutors call DiBiase a thief and a con man. His attorney says today.
Come from money, I come from class. They love the story, they love the past. Won't let a courtroom spoil my dream, cause I got money and I can do anything.
Ted DiBiase Jr. just walked out of federal court a free man, not a plea deal. And not even a mistrial, as much as they try to push over the couple of years. Not some weird legal technicality. A jury looked at all 13 counts and said not guilty on every single one. And that right there is the part that's going to set the wrestling world off. Because to some people, this means Ted DiBiase Jr. was railroaded for years. To others, this is going to feel like yet another example of powerful people standing next to corruption and somehow walking away clean. And that's where this gets messy, because even though Ted DiBiase Jr. was acquitted, the Mississippi welfare scandal itself is still one of the nastiest public scandals tied to a wrestling name in recent memory. The broader scheme involved the misuse of more than $77 million in welfare money meant for poor families in Mississippi, and multiple other people already pleaded guilty. So today, we're not doing any lazy outrage. We're not doing fake courtroom cosplay. We're doing what we always do here. What happened, why the jury may have reached that verdict, and why not guilty does not magically make this whole story smell any better. So what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Tea Drop, where the tea is hot and takes are strong. And today we have to talk about Ted DiBiase Jr. Because after 2 years of headline accusations, court filings, and that giant cloud hanging over his name, Ted DiBiase Jr. has now been found not guilty on all 13 federal counts in his conspiracy trial. He has been facing charges including conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement, with reports saying he could have faced over 160 years. And in another version of the reporting, up to 185 years in federal prison if convicted. Instead, after around 4 hours of deliberation, the jury said no. All counts gone. And outside the courthouse, Ted DiBiase Jr. was emotional. He said this cloud has been hanging over him for years and that the ordeal has almost torn his family apart. So now the question becomes, was Ted DiBiase Jr. falsely painted as a villain in a scandal bigger than him? Or did the prosecution simply fall to prove what a lot of people already believe? Because those are not the same things. So without further ado, let's get to a video. I can pull it up because I should have been ready for this. There we go. Let's get to this, and we're just going to fast forward because we already watched part of this. So boom, boom. Oh man, he was crying about this one. So before we get any further, let's start with the basics. Federal prosecutors said Ted DiBiase Jr. was part of the massive Mississippi welfare scandal, a scandal tied to welfare money that was supposed to help needy families and low-income residents. The government argued that DiBiase received money through sham contracts for services that were never really provided, and that money allegedly flowed through nonprofits connected to the state's welfare system. Prosecutors claim he pocketed millions in federal funds meant for the poorest people in Mississippi. The allegations were ugly. We're talking claims that money connected to public assistance programs was used for personal expenses, including reports of a luxury home, a truck, a boat, a Disney trip, and other lavish purchases. And the federal case centered on the idea that Ted DiBiase Jr. and the companies tied to him received millions while pretending this was a legitimate contract work. But there was no audio in the video? Oh, well, I guess we're going back. Let's go back to the video. Oh boy, we'll go back.
I believe they got it right. And give all glory to God. I give all the credit to my Lord and Savior.
The jury.
So like I was saying before, let's start with the basics. Federal prosecutors said Ted DiBiase Jr. was part of the massive Mississippi welfare scandal. A scandal that tied welfare money that was supposed to help needy families and low-income residents. The government argued that DiBiase received money through sham contracts for services that were never really provided, and that money allegedly flowed through nonprofits connected to the state's welfare system. Prosecutors claim he pocketed millions in federal funds meant for the poorest people in Mississippi. The allegations were ugly. We're talking claims that money connected to public assistance programs was used for personal expenses, including reports of a luxury home, a truck, a boat, and other lavish expenses. And the federal case centered on the idea that Ted DiBiase Jr. and companies tied to him received millions while pretending this was legitimate contracted work. Prosecutors said those contracts totaled more than $2.9 million, while others reported in the text says his companies nested more than $3.2 million in contracts, while John Davis led MDHS. So let's continue.
Deliberated for just over 4 hours.
By the way, the person he's hugging right now is his brother, who is still dealing with the trial because he said he was guilty. So he has to deal with that.
They didn't buy prosecutors' case that the former pro wrestler stole some $2.9 million in federal welfare funds that officials say was intended for low-income Mississippians. DiBiase thanking and praising members of his legal team.
I did an amazing job of portraying truth, and 7 years of being slandered. And
So let's talk a little bit about John Davis. The accusation was that he knowingly benefited from a fraudulent system taking money intended for vulnerable people, and that's basically what they're saying about DiBiase. So that's why this whole thing was so serious. Now, here's where the defense drew a completely different picture. Ted DiBiase's junior attorney, Scott Gilbert, essentially told the jury, "You are blaming the wrong man." The defense pinned the real power and responsibility on John Davis, the former head of the Mississippi Department of Human Services. Let's continue.
made to be something that is completely false. Is about torn my family apart, but we're strong.
For 6 years of his life,
This is Scott Gilbert, by the way.
he's been unemployable. He's been unable to do anything at all to help support and take care of his family.
4 members of the U.S. Attorney's Office who tried the case against DiBiase could hardly believe their ears as they listened to the court clerk read the words "not guilty" 13 times
13 times. 13 times straight they said he wasn't guilty.
as the jury looked on from across the courtroom.
And so I hope people will respect the judgment of these jurors, because one thing that these jurors have been exposed to that nobody else in the world has seen is the whole story.
Lead defense attorney Scott Gilbert says he saw a good sign early on, just a short time before the verdict came down, when the jury sent a note to the judge asking a question about convicting DiBiase of embezzlement, even if he wasn't aware those funds he received were obtained fraudulently.
So that's the thing. Gilbert argued that Davis was the one calling the shots, controlling the system, handing out contracts, and pulling everyone into this chaotic structure of this. And the defense version, Ted DiBiase Jr. did not mastermind a fraud. He accepted contracts that Davis offered. He did actual work. And he was operating inside a dysfunctional system created from the top down. That's important because in a criminal trial, the government doesn't just have to make the jury suspicious, they have to prove it. And the defense kept coming back to that point. Ted wasn't asking for these contracts. Ted wasn't secretly building some criminal empire. Ted was doing meetings, radios, TV ads, travel planning, and business development work, tied to what he believed he'd been brought in to do. They also brought out witnesses to support the idea that DiBiase was actually involved in projects including app concepts and outreach planning, even if some of those projects never fully materialized.
When the jury asks a question about what it means when they don't think the defendant knew that something happened, that's a pretty good indicator that they had decided that whatever went on, Teddy DiBiase wasn't a part of.
To all the doubters or haters or people that have maybe had false information and not all the information, I forgive you, and I love you too.
He forgives us all, guys. Anyway, one witness testified that DiBiase brought ideas, relationships, and connectivity, putting plans for a Get Fit app aimed at healthier living. And that may have been enough to create the one thing a defense team dreams about: reasonable doubt. Not Ted is a saint, not really everything about this was just normal, just enough doubt for 12 people to say, we cannot convict this man beyond a reasonable doubt. And clearly, that's what happened.
Take a look at some of the 7
And there's Brett DiBiase, his brother that he hugged.
people who've already pleaded guilty for their role in the massive welfare scandal, including John Davis, Nancy New, and Christy Webb. They actually testified against DiBiase. In his trial, DiBiase's attorney saying tonight that those individuals may want to reconsider the decisions they've already made. Of course, each individual...
That's facts. After all this, they might want to question, hey, maybe I should have done the same thing as Ted DiBiase and been okay.
Who's already pleaded in this scandal, their case may not directly tie back to DiBiase. Tonight, the state auditor expressing disappointment with the outcome of the trial. He hopes that state lawyers can recover some of the millions of welfare dollars through civil lawsuits so that Mississippi taxpayers won't see a total loss.
So, because even with the acquittal, the whole story still has details that make you stop and go, what? Because the text message and the testimony around John Davis, Ted DiBiase Jr., and even Brett DiBiase painted a bizarre picture, as you saw in my previous videos with the text messages, the weird notes and whatever. According to the reporting in the file, prosecutors introduced messages showing Davis promising to help Ted Jr. and Brett build generational wealth. There were also messages where Davis expressed intense personal attachment and wrote things like, "It is me who tried to buy all of your love." That is not normal government business. It's not even how public money is supposed to move. And testimony from Christy Webb made it even uglier. She said Davis would call sometimes late at night, emotional, and insist that Ted keeps getting funded. So even if the jury said the government didn't prove Ted DiBiase Jr. committed these crimes, what they absolutely did not say was that this welfare system was clean, professional, or ethical. Because it clearly wasn't. That part is important. A not guilty verdict is not the same thing as moral endorsement. It means the government failed to prove the criminal case against that defendant. That's it. And this is the part people online are going to butcher. You're going to see one side say, see, he was innocent the whole time, everybody lied. And then you're going to see the other side. Please, he got away with it. But the actual truth is more uncomfortable than either of those clean little slogans. Because the scandal itself is real. The misuse of welfare money is real. And 7 people already pleaded guilty to state or federal charges related to that scandal. Mississippi State Auditor Shad White said after the verdict that he was disappointed, but also stressed that nothing changes the fact that multiple people already pleaded guilty. And that the state still hopes to recover as much of the misspent money as possible through civil court. So no, the verdict does not wipe away the scandal, it does not erase the misuse of funds, and it does not mean the entire public was crazy for questioning Ted DiBiase Jr.'s role. It feels like it was part of it. What it means is that in this courtroom with the evidence against the defendant, the jury was not convinced at all. That's a very different statement, and honestly, that's why this story is so frustrating. Because people want courtroom dramas to end in a neat, satisfying way with a hero winning, a villain losing, and then you roll the credits. Real life doesn't work like that. Sometimes the system is filthy. Multiple people are guilty. Millions move in ways they never should have. And one specific person still cannot be convicted on the evidence presented. That is a very hard thing for people to sit with. But that is what happens here. Now, from the wrestling perspective, this story was always going to carry extra weight because of the name. Ted DiBiase Jr. is not just some random businessman. He's the son of the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, one of the most iconic characters of his era. And that family name made the headlines hit harder every single time because wrestling fans know the gimmick. They know the imagery. They know what $1 Million Man means in wrestling history. So when the last name gets attached to a welfare scandal involving accusations of luxury homes, shell companies, and misused money meant for poor families, yeah, the optics were and became nuclear. And now the optics swing the other way, because some fans are going to look at this equitable and say Ted DiBiase Jr. was dragged through the mud for 7 years. In fact, outside the courtroom, he said he has been slandered for years and that it nearly tore his family apart. And that's heavy. Whether you like him or not, whether you believe the case or not, 7 years under that kind of clout is brutal. But again, and this is where the teardrop, as always, gets real. Public suspicion did not come out of nowhere. It came from the scale of the scandal, the money involved, and the fact that so many other connected people already admitted guilt. So both things can be true. This may have been a terrible, life-altering ordeal for Ted DiBiase Jr., and people were not irrational for asking hard questions. For me, this verdict tells me less about whether the whole thing was clean and more about how hard is it to prove criminal intent when the system itself was apparently chaotic, badly structured, and full of powerful people pushing money in questionable ways. The prosecution story was basically Ted DiBiase Jr. knowingly got rich off sham contracts and public money meant for the poor. The defense's story was John Davis was the real power player. The contracts were offered to Ted. Ted did perform work, and the entire setup was dysfunctional from the top. The jury sided with doubt, and once that happens, that's the verdict. That's the law, and I guess that's how it works. But for me, the most important thing is this. The scandal still matters because when public money meant for struggling family gets tangled up in celebrity access, private relationships, political power, oversight, and bizarre contract arrangement, that is bigger than one man's acquittal. That's a systematic failure. And if people reduce this entire thing to either, I don't know, LOL, he beats the case, or nothing happens, then they're missing the ugliest part of this story. So yeah, Ted DiBiase Jr. has been found not guilty on all 13 counts. The jury cleared him criminally, and whatever people think emotionally, legally, that matters. But the Mississippi welfare scandal is still real to this day. The pleas from others are still real. The questions about how all of this money moved are still real. And that's why this story is going to keep getting talked about. Because the verdict ended his trial. It did not end the stink on the scandal itself. So let me know what you think in the comments. Did the jury get it right? Did the prosecution overreach? Or do you think this is one of those cases where not guilty still leaves a lot of people uneasy? If you enjoyed this video, drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the